Good night, Malaysian 370. Those were the last known words from the cockpit. A simple, calm farewell drifting across the midnight radio waves. Moments later, flight MH370 would cease to exist. The night that changed everything. It was March 8, 2014. A warm, quiet Saturday in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. The airport hummed with the usual rhythm of departures and reunions. Inside the gleaming terminal of Kuala Lumpur International Airport, KLIA, passengers lined up at Gate C1 for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, bound for Beijing, China. The aircraft? A Boeing 777-200ER, tail number 9MMRD, one of the safest and most reliable jets in the sky. On board, 239 souls, 227 passengers, 12 crew members. Among them were businessmen, families, students, and children. Ordinary travelers with ordinary plans. In command sat Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old, a senior pilot with over 18,000 flight hours. Calm, methodical, respected. His co-pilot, First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid, was just 27, young, confident, nearing the end of his training on the Boeing 777. They were professionals, experienced, trusted. At 12:41 a.m. local time, MH370 lifted off the runway. The engines roared, lights shimmered across the tarmac, and the aircraft ascended into the tropical night. The sky was clear, the weather calm. To everyone on board, it was just another routine red-eye flight across the South China Sea. Routine turns to silence. At 1:07 a.m., the aircraft sent its final ACARS transmission, a routine message reporting its systems were normal. 10 minutes later, as it approached the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace, air traffic controllers at Kuala Lumpur Area Control Center handed the flight off to Ho Chi Minh City Control. Captain Zahari's voice came through clearly over the radio. Good night, Malaysian 370. It was the last confirmed communication from the cockpit. At 1:21 a.m., MH370's transponder, the electronic device that identifies the plane to radar, suddenly stopped transmitting. On radar screens across Southeast Asia, the aircraft simply disappeared. No distress call, no warning. Just gone. Confusion in the control room. Inside Malaysia's Air Traffic Control Center, confusion turned quickly into panic. Controllers assumed the plane had passed smoothly into Vietnamese airspace. In Ho Chi Minh City, controllers waited and waited. When MH370 failed to check in, they radioed back to Malaysia. Do you have contact? No. We show them clear of our airspace, but we don't see them. Minutes turned to hours. By 2:30 a.m., the first signs of alarm appeared. When all radio attempts failed, both control centers began notifying search and rescue units. At 5:30 a.m., MH370 was officially declared missing. By dawn, Malaysia Airlines issued a brief, sterile statement. Malaysia Airlines confirms that flight MH370 lost contact with Subang Air Traffic Control at 2:40 a.m. this morning. The airline is working with the authorities, who have activated search and rescue operations. But behind that statement, a storm of uncertainty was already forming. Families waiting, cameras flashing at Beijing Capital International Airport. Families gathered anxiously in the arrivals hall. They held flowers, cameras, Signs. The board still read, Malaysia Airlines MH370, arriving 6:30 a.m. But that time came and went. No plane appeared. Within hours, television crews arrived. The scene turned chaotic. Families begged for answers. Airline representatives stood silently, their faces pale. One woman screamed, "Where is the plane? Where is my son?" No one could answer her. The first search by mid-morning, search and rescue aircraft from Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand were combing the waters of the Gulf of Thailand. They expected to find wreckage, debris, oil slicks, something. But the skies were clear, the seas calm, and there was nothing. Hours stretched into days. Dozens of ships and aircraft joined the hunt. The U.S. Navy dispatched a P-8 Poseidon surveillance plane. China sent 10 satellites to scan the ocean. Vietnam deployed Coast Guard vessels and helicopters. Still, not a single trace. The world was watching. The world was waiting. And then, a stunning revelation shattered everything the public thought it knew. Radar that shouldn't exist. On March 11th, Malaysian military officials admitted that their radar had tracked something strange. An unidentified aircraft had turned west, back across the Malaysian peninsula, just minutes after MH370 vanished from civilian radar. This mystery target, believed to be MH370, flew over the Strait of Malacca, passing near Penang Island before disappearing entirely over the Andaman Sea at around 2:22 a.m. If true, it meant the aircraft had flown 7 more hours after vanishing. 7 hours without contact, without explanation. The implications were staggering. This wasn't an explosion or a crash over the South China Sea. Something or someone had deliberately changed the plane's course. A ghost in the sky. Analysts began to reconstruct what might have happened. After the transponder shut down at 1:21 a.m., the aircraft made a sharp left turn. Its altitude fluctuated dramatically, from 35,000 feet down to 12,000, then back up, as if someone was manually flying the jet. It then followed a precise path along navigational waypoints: Igari, Vampi, Givol, Mecker, suggesting whoever was in control knew the route intimately. By 2:22 a.m., military radar lost the target completely. But there was still one invisible link: a digital fingerprint hidden in the sky. The handshake. MH370's engines, like many modern aircraft, automatically transmitted pings, silent digital handshakes, to a satellite operated by Inmarsat, a British telecommunications company. These pings didn't carry messages, but they proved the plane was still powered and airborne. For nearly 7 hours after its disappearance, MH370 continued pinging the satellite at hourly intervals. The last signal came at 8:19 a.m. over a remote stretch of the southern Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from its intended path. Then, silence forever. A global obsession begins. By the evening of March 8th, MH370's disappearance dominated every news outlet on Earth. CNN broadcast live 24/7 coverage for weeks. Hashtags like MH370 and Find MH370 trended globally. Armchair investigators scoured maps online. Everyone wanted to solve the mystery. But beneath the frenzy, something darker brewed. Suspicion. Why had Malaysia Airlines and government officials waited nearly 5 hours before raising the alarm? Why did it take days for the radar data to be revealed? And who, if anyone, was responsible for turning off the transponder? Inside the airline's headquarters in Kuala Lumpur, exhausted officials tried to maintain control, but the truth was clear. No one knew where the plane was. The families, in hotels around Kuala Lumpur and Beijing. Hundreds of families lived in limbo. They gathered in conference rooms, clutching photos and hope. Every day, Malaysia Airlines held briefings. Every day, officials promised answers that never came. One father said softly to reporters, "My daughter is out there somewhere. Maybe she's cold, maybe she's scared. I just want to bring her home." Some families refused to leave. They slept on floors, waiting for any sign, any scrap of information. Others demanded accountability, accusing the airline of hiding the truth. A few clung to conspiracy theories, hijacking, military cover-ups, alien abductions. The uncertainty was unbearable. Theories begin. By the end of March, investigators had little more than radar lines and satellite arcs, two enormous search corridors, stretching north and south from the last ping point. The northern route would have carried MH370 toward Central Asia, possibly Kazakhstan. The southern route ended in the remote emptiness of the Indian Ocean. Most evidence pointed south. But how could a Boeing 777 filled with passengers vanish into one of the most heavily monitored skies on Earth? As the first month ended, debris hunters, oceanographers, and intelligence agencies all joined forces. Ships mapped underwater terrain, submarines scanned the ocean floor, and aircraft flew endless grid patterns. The search area, an area larger than the size of the United Kingdom, yielded nothing. A sky without answers. In the weeks that followed, the world began to realize this wasn't just an aviation disaster. It was a modern ghost story. Every piece of technology, radar, satellites, communications, had failed. The families were trapped in an endless cycle of hope and heartbreak. Governments offered press conferences full of contradictions. And somewhere, deep in the ocean or beyond, the truth remained hidden. To this day, no wreckage had been found. No Mayday call. No confirmed cause. Just that calm, final transmission. Good night, Malaysian 370. The sky remembers everything. But on that March morning in 2014, it remembered nothing of Flight MH370. A world on alert. Dawn broke across Southeast Asia on March 8, 2014, and with it came confusion. By 9 a.m., a full-scale international search effort was underway, though no one yet knew where to look. The initial search zone covered the Gulf of Thailand, a stretch of water between Malaysia and Vietnam. Malaysia deployed aircraft and naval ships, joined quickly by units from Singapore, Thailand, China, and Vietnam. The hope was simple: find debris, survivors, or any floating sign of wreckage. But as each hour passed, the sea remained empty. At the Royal Malaysian Air Force Command Center in Butterworth, officers pored over radar data and flight logs. One controller recalled later, "It was like chasing a ghost. Every time we thought we had a lead, it vanished." By noon, confusion was turning into disbelief. The family's longest day. Meanwhile, at Beijing Capital Airport, the relatives of the 153 Chinese passengers sat in a sterile conference room. Airline representatives handed out water bottles and thin blankets. Many hadn't slept since the night before. A journalist captured the moment when one woman screamed, "My mother was on that plane," before collapsing to the floor. Others demanded answers. "Why can't you find it? How can a plane just disappear?" No one, not even the airline, had an answer that made sense. Pause. The map expands by March 9th. As daylight faded over the Gulf of Thailand, searchers began widening the area. The U.S. Navy joined the mission with the USS Pinckney, a destroyer equipped with advanced sonar and helicopters. Australia, Indonesia, and India offered surveillance aircraft. Still, the result was the same: nothing. And then, behind closed doors in Kuala Lumpur, the radar mystery came to light. Malaysia's military radar, separate from civilian tracking, had picked up an unidentified aircraft, making a sharp left turn around 1:30 a.m., crossing the Malay Peninsula and disappearing over the Andaman Sea. At first, officials dismissed it. Surely, this was another plane. But as investigators checked timestamps and coordinates, the chilling truth emerged. It matched MH370 almost perfectly. The turning point. The revelation changed everything. MH370 hadn't crashed in the South China Sea. It had turned back and flown west. That meant the first 2 days of searching had been completely wasted in the wrong part of the ocean. Publicly, the Malaysian government hesitated to admit the mistake. Internally, panic grew. The world's eyes were watching, and every decision or delay mattered. At Malaysia Airlines headquarters, staff were forbidden from speaking to media. But leaks began to emerge. Anonymous sources told CNN and Reuters that military radar showed the plane traveling hundreds of miles off course. Suddenly, the story of a routine crash became something far stranger. A mystery deepens. On March 11th, 4 days after the disappearance, the first images of possible debris surfaced online. Satellite photographs of what appeared to be large objects floating near Tuachu Island. News agencies rushed to broadcast them. But by the next day, ships arrived at the coordinates and found nothing. A Vietnamese official said bitterly, "The ocean lies to us." Every time hope surfaced, the waves took it away. The search grows and fractures. By March 12th, the search area spanned 94,000 square miles, roughly the size of Poland. It now included both sides of the Malaysian Peninsula, the South China Sea to the east and the Andaman Sea to the west. At sea level, it was chaos. Nearly 40 ships and dozens of aircraft, each under different national commands, often overlapping. There was no unified control center. The operation was fast becoming one of the most complex searches in aviation history. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, Boeing, and Interpol began investigating whether terrorism or hijacking could be involved. Two Iranian passengers. On March 11th, new headlines exploded. Two passengers had boarded MH370 using stolen passports. One Italian, one Austrian. Their names were Luigi Maraldi and Christian Kozel. But the real travelers were Iranian nationals. Immediately, the word terrorism filled every headline. But within days, Interpol clarified that the men were likely migrants traveling illegally to Europe, not terrorists. The theory collapsed. But by then, the world had already taken notice, and paranoia had replaced logic. Inmarsat's secret trail. The breakthrough came quietly. Engineers at the Inmarsat satellite company in London realized that even after MH370's transponder and radios went dark, its satellite data unit had continued to send automated handshake pings to an orbiting satellite over the Indian Ocean. 6 of these pings were recorded between 2:25 a.m. and 8:19 a.m., long after the plane was assumed lost. Using complex mathematical analysis, Inmarsat tracked the distance between the satellite and MH370 at each ping. The data formed 2 vast arcs, one stretching north through Central Asia, the other curving south into the remote southern Indian Ocean. No one knew which arc was correct, but one thing was certain. MH370 had kept flying for hours. It wasn't a sudden disaster. It was a journey into the unknown. Political pressure and chaos. By March 15th, the world's patience had run out. The Malaysian Prime Minister, Najib Razak, held an emergency press conference. Standing before the nation's flag, he announced, "We can say, with a high degree of certainty, that the aircraft's communication systems were deliberately disabled, and the plane's movements are consistent with deliberate action." In one sentence, he transformed MH370 from a tragedy into a crime. Theories multiplied overnight: hijacking, pilot suicide, state sabotage. Social media exploded. Experts debated endlessly. Was Captain Zahari responsible? Had someone seized control of the aircraft? Or had it been reprogrammed remotely? Malaysia's government struggled to control the narrative. Their communication with other countries was chaotic. Their data inconsistent. Families grew furious. In Beijing, some relatives even stormed the Malaysian embassy, demanding the truth. A search without end. The following week, the search shifted to the southern Indian Ocean, one of the most remote and treacherous bodies of water on Earth. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority, AMSA, took command. Planes flew out of Perth, scouring thousands of square miles each day. The weather was brutal. Gale-force winds, heavy rain, endless waves. On March 24th, after analyzing Inmarsat's satellite data, Prime Minister Najib Razak gave the announcement that many had feared. Based on new analysis, we must conclude that flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean. There were no survivors, no wreckage recovered, just math, cold, abstract math. The families erupted in anger. Many refused to believe it. Some screamed, others collapsed. "Show us the proof," they cried. But there was none. The ocean of ghosts. Weeks turned to months. The official search area moved repeatedly. First, 600 miles southwest of Perth, then Farther north, satellite images from China and France hinted at debris fields, but every lead failed. One Australian search pilot described the mission. You fly for 10 hours, staring at endless waves, seeing nothing. Then you land and realize tomorrow you'll do it all again. By May 2014, more than 80 ships and 60 aircraft had participated. Over 2.8 million square miles of ocean were searched, and still, MH370 remained invisible. It was as if the sea had swallowed it whole, the captain's life under the microscope. As the search dragged on, investigators turned their eyes toward Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah. They scoured his home, computers, flight simulator, and personal life. One discovery stood out. Zahari had used his simulator to fly a virtual route into the southern Indian Ocean weeks before the disappearance. To some, that was damning evidence. To others, coincidence. Pilots often simulated challenging scenarios. Friends described him as calm and kind, a man who loved technology and politics. But online forums soon branded him a murderer. Malaysia never confirmed any evidence of wrongdoing. Yet for many, suspicion lingered. The world moves on. The families don't. By late 2014, MH370 had faded from the news cycle, replaced by new crises and headlines. But in Malaysia and China, grief still lived in hotel conference rooms, turned into makeshift memorials. Photos of the missing, smiling faces, wedding pictures, children's drawings lined the walls. Candles flickered beneath banners that read, "Come home, MH370. Some families began private searches, pooling funds for independent sonar missions. Others turned to psychics, desperate for closure. The airline eventually compensated families, but for many, no amount of money could fill the void of not knowing. A ghost becomes legend. As 2014 turned to 2015, the world had stopped looking, until a single piece of wreckage washed ashore. On July 29, 2015, residents of Reunion Island, off the coast of Africa, found a flaperon, a wing part, half buried in sand. Serial numbers confirmed it belonged to MH370. For the first time, proof existed that the plane had indeed gone down in the southern Indian Ocean. But even that answer led to more questions. Why had it turned back? Who controlled it in its final hours? And why had no distress signal ever been sent? The sky keeps its secrets. The discovery of debris brought little closure, only the grim confirmation that 239 souls had perished. The official investigation would continue for years, producing over 500 pages of reports, thousands of sonar images, and still no definitive cause. As one Australian search leader said in 2016, "We've mapped more of Mars than this part of the ocean." It was the most expensive search in aviation history, and one of the least conclusive. To this day, the ocean still guards the truth, and somewhere beneath the endless blue, MH370 sleeps, a modern ghost in a digital age. The ocean buried the wreckage. A search without coordinates. When the official search for MH370 entered its second month, investigators were left chasing what one analyst called a crime scene with no body. There were no black boxes, no wreckage field, not even a floating seat cushion. All that remained was a trail of digital breadcrumbs. 7 pings between the aircraft and a British satellite orbiting 35,000 kilometers above Earth. Those pings became the single thread connecting the world to a vanished plane. The task? Reconstruct an 8-hour flight path from nothing but time, distance, and silence. The Inmarsat puzzle, inside a quiet London office. Engineers at Inmarsat worked through nights, illuminated by glowing screens and half-empty coffee cups. The team's lead scientist, Chris Ashton, described the process as listening to whispers from space. Each handshake between the satellite and the aircraft's data unit carried burst timing offset, BTO, and burst frequency offset, BFO, cryptic numbers that indicated how far away the aircraft was and how fast it was moving relative to the satellite. By analyzing those tiny Doppler shifts, Inmarsat realized the plane had followed a southern arc, flying into a region where no radar, no radio, and no rescue could reach. The final ping, received at 8:19 a.m., showed a sudden drop in altitude, a clue that the aircraft might have run out of fuel and plunged into the sea. It was flying until the very end, one engineer said. Someone was in control, or the autopilot was. But who and why remained the question that haunted everyone. The black box that never spoke. Every modern airliner carries two black boxes, one for cockpit voice, the other for flight data. Both were designed to emit pings for 30 days after a crash. When search vessels began dragging hydrophones across the southern Indian Ocean in April 2014, they detected faint underwater signals, rhythmic pulses near 37.5 kilohertz, matching the black box's frequency. For 2 weeks, excitement grew. News headlines blazed, signals detected, searchers close to MH370. But by late April, the signals stopped. When the seabed was finally mapped and scanned, no wreckage appeared. Some believed the pings had come from the aircraft's black boxes. Others argued they were from old military equipment or natural underwater echoes. In the end, the ocean gave back nothing but static. Inside the war room, in Canberra, Beijing, and Kuala Lumpur, the investigation fractured into multiple camps. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau, ATSB, led the deep-sea search. Malaysia's own team controlled the political narrative, and the Independent Group, a coalition of international experts, analyzed satellite data from their homes, often discovering mistakes in the official math. Each group had different priorities: science, image, and truth. It became a battle of egos, one investigator later admitted. And meanwhile, the families waited for answers that weren't coming. Every new theory, from depressurization to hijacking, was debated, tested, and often discarded. But the deeper they looked, the stranger it all seemed. Theory 1, the sudden emergency. Some experts proposed a technical failure, a fire or electrical problem that disabled communications and forced the pilots to turn back. They pointed to the cargo, 221 kilograms of lithium-ion batteries, which, under certain conditions, could ignite. Perhaps, they said, the cockpit filled with smoke. The crew, half-blinded, tried to return to Kuala Lumpur, but passed out from hypoxia. The autopilot then flew the plane on until the fuel ran dry. The theory explained the turnback, but it didn't explain the precise navigation across Malaysian airspace, or why the transponder was deliberately switched off. Machines don't turn off transponders. People do. Theory 2, pilot deliberate action. As early as March, Whispers had begun about Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah. He was 53, a veteran with over 18,000 flight hours, a man respected by peers, but described by some as quietly intense. When investigators found his home flight simulator, it contained one deleted route, a simulated flight deep into the southern Indian Ocean. To many, that was enough to declare him guilty, but the evidence was circumstantial. There was no note, no message, no proof of suicidal intent. His colleagues insisted he was stable, professional, and deeply committed to his family. Still, the data painted an eerie picture, a steady, deliberate flight path, far from any land, until fuel exhaustion. If it was deliberate, one analyst said, it was the perfect crime, one that vanishes itself. Theory 3. Hijacking or state involvement. By May 2014, online forums and fringe journalists had embraced darker explanations. Some claimed MH370 had been hijacked and diverted to a secret base, perhaps in Diego Garcia, a U.S. military installation in the Indian Ocean. Others believed it was shot down accidentally and covered up. The Malaysian government denied all such claims. So did the U.S. and China. But the longer the truth remained hidden, the louder the conspiracies grew. Digital forensics and shadows. In 2015, new data emerged. Investigators discovered that the aircraft's satellite system had been manually rebooted sometime after it turned west, meaning someone in the cockpit had reactivated it. That detail shattered the idea of a fully unconscious crew. Someone was awake. At the same time, Malaysian police traced Zahari's final digital footprints, forum posts, social media activity, and messages to a woman on Facebook. Nothing suggested despair or radicalization. The puzzle deepened. It was as if someone had wanted to erase the line between accident and intention. The deep ocean search. The ocean floor southwest of Australia was mapped using high-resolution sonar. What they found was otherworldly. Mountain ranges taller than skyscrapers, trenches deeper than the Grand Canyon, and plateaus littered with volcanic rock. Between 2014 and 2017, search ships scanned over 120,000 square kilometers. Every blip, shadow, and metallic reflection was investigated. Every one turned out to be rocks, whales, or junk. By early 2017, the official search was suspended. The governments of Malaysia, China, and Australia announced that without new evidence, they could go no further. "We have looked where science told us to look," the final report stated. The aircraft is not there. But science, as always, had been working with ghosts. A private mission. In 2018, a private U.S. company, Ocean Infinity, launched a new search using advanced underwater drones capable of scanning wider areas at triple the speed of traditional sonar. They searched 112,000 square kilometers in 90 days. Nothing. Even with 21st century technology, the ocean remained impenetrable, a dark, silent archive that refused to open. One Ocean Infinity engineer described it bluntly: "The sea is still winning." Fragments of proof. From 2015 to 2018, 33 pieces of debris linked to MH370 were found across the western Indian Ocean. In Reunion, Mozambique, Madagascar, Tanzania, and even South Africa. Some were confirmed by serial numbers. Others matched the plane's materials and paint. Each fragment told a small part of the story: a torn wing edge, a flaperon, a cabin panel. But none revealed how the plane had fallen, or why. As investigators analyzed them, they noticed something strange. The debris patterns suggested a high-speed impact, not a gentle glide. That supported the theory of a final nosedive, perhaps with no one alive to pull up. The final report. In July 2018, Malaysia released its official 495-page report. Its conclusion was devastating and empty. The team is unable to determine the real cause for the disappearance of MH370. It listed possibilities: mechanical failure, pilot intervention, unlawful interference. But for every theory, there were contradictions. The words, "we cannot exclude," appeared 46 times in the document. It was less a report than a confession. We searched. We failed. We don't know. The family's endless vigil. To this day, families still gather every March 8th in Kuala Lumpur and Beijing, lighting candles beneath banners that read, MH370, remember. Some hold hope. Others hold anger. Many hold both. A mother in Beijing once said, "If they had crashed, I could mourn, but they vanished. How do you mourn a ghost?" The silence of the Southern Ocean has become a permanent wound, a reminder that even in an age of GPS, satellites, and smartphones, something can still simply disappear. A modern legend, MH370 has entered modern folklore, part tragedy, part enigma. Books, documentaries, and theories continue to multiply. Every few months, new evidence surfaces online, often disproved, but always believed by someone. And maybe that's the final power of the story. Not in its facts, but in its unknowability. Because somewhere beneath thousands of miles of ocean, a 777 sleeps intact. Its black boxes silent, its passengers forever suspended in time. A digital ghost in an analog world. A question with no answer. A mystery that refuses to end. When a plane disappears, it doesn't just vanish from the sky. It vanishes from hundreds of lives, leaving a hole that never closes. The first nights of waiting. At Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Gate C1 remained lit long after it should have gone dark. Families of the missing passengers had been brought there by Malaysian Airlines officials, told to wait for updates. They sat for hours under harsh fluorescent light, staring at screens that showed nothing new. The flight status still read, delayed. But by morning, the word changed. Uncontactable. That single word, cold, bureaucratic, shattered the air. Mothers screamed. Fathers collapsed. Some simply stood still, as if their minds had short-circuited. "What does uncontactable mean?" one woman shouted at a uniformed employee. "It means," he said quietly, "we can't find the plane." No one believed it. Not yet. The Hotel of Ghosts. Malaysian Airlines booked out the Everly Hotel in Putrajaya for the families. For weeks, it became both refuge and nightmare. The lobby smelled of burnt coffee and panic. People clutched photographs, graduations, weddings, baby faces. Reporters camped outside, waiting to catch grief on camera. In the hallways, Families spoke in whispers, sharing theories they had picked up from the news. One man swore his wife had texted him, "I'm safe," hours after the plane disappeared. Another claimed she'd seen her son's phone still ringing. Those flickers of false hope, glitches of technology, or something more, kept everyone awake. The hardest part, said a mother from Beijing, was not knowing if I should grieve or pray. The investigator who couldn't sleep. Across the city, Captain Peter Chong, a retired pilot and investigator, had become obsessed. He'd flown the same routes, used the same checklists, even known Captain Zahari personally. When MH370 vanished, it felt personal. A professional wound and a moral debt. He spent nights poring over satellite data, radar trails, and wind charts. His office became a maze of maps and red string, a physical manifestation of obsession. "We lost a plane," he said, "in the 21st century. How is that even possible?" His wife began to worry. She found him one morning, asleep at his desk, face pressed against a printout of the flight path. He'd been dreaming of an endless horizon and a single blip fading off the radar. The families turned to each other. By April, a strange sense of community had formed among the families, people from 15 countries, united by one impossible loss. They called themselves the Voice of MH370. In hotel conference rooms and online chat groups, they began to exchange information, demand answers, and coordinate global protests. They became investigators, journalists, activists, because no one else seemed to care enough. "When governments forget," said Grace Subatharai, whose husband was aboard the plane, "families remember." Some began traveling to Madagascar, Reunion, and Mozambique themselves, searching beaches for debris. They collected barnacled fragments of metal, comparing serial numbers by hand. None of them were scientists. They were just parents trying to touch something real. A plane that refused to die. Every few months, a new rumor surfaced. A signal picked up, a radar echo, a pilot sighting. Each one brought the families running back to their screens, hearts pounding. One Chinese father, Li Cheng, admitted he had packed his son's suitcase every morning for 2 years, in case he came home. A mother in Kuala Lumpur kept her daughter's phone plan active, so she can still call. "It's like we're all haunted," said another father, "but the ghost isn't of our loved ones. It's of the not knowing." The conspiracy spiral. By mid-2015, as official searches yielded nothing, a darker culture emerged online. YouTube, Reddit, and Telegram filled with self-proclaimed experts. Some posted radar animations and cockpit recreations. Others insisted MH370 had been hijacked for a secret bioweapon or abducted by a foreign power. Some families found temporary comfort there, in communities that at least believed something. Others saw it as a curse. "The internet became our second tragedy," said Li Cheng. "They turned our grief into content." The woman who found the wing. In July 2015, on the island of Reunion, a man named Johnny Begg found a strange piece of metal washed up on the beach. A torn flaperon with numbers stamped inside. He didn't know what it was, but when photos reached Malaysia, investigators confirmed it belonged to MH370. For the first time, there was physical proof. The world watched as the debris was flown to Toulouse, France, for testing. When confirmation came back, families wept, not from relief, but from exhaustion. "I didn't want to find parts," one woman said. "I wanted to find people." The investigators' descent. By 2016, even professional investigators were beginning to break. Captain Chong, now gaunt and sleepless, began to see patterns everywhere. Flight paths, satellite shadows, even shapes in ocean currents. He'd tell his colleagues, "They're talking to us. We're just not listening correctly." One night, he stared at the flickering sonar images from the seabed and swore he saw a faint outline. Wings, a fuselage, a ghost. When he blinked, it was gone. "I think the sea doesn't want to give it back," he whispered. The families versus the government. In Beijing, hundreds of Chinese families staged protests outside the Malaysian embassy. They accused the government of lying, of hiding the truth to protect airline business. Police dispersed them, but the footage went viral. In Kuala Lumpur, the Prime Minister's office faced the same fury. At a 2016 memorial, one father grabbed the microphone and shouted, "Tell us the truth! Tell us where they are!" Officials had no answer. Psychological shadows. Psychologists later coined a term for what these families endured: ambiguous loss, grief without closure. Unlike death, where there is a body, a ritual, a finality, ambiguous loss traps the mind between hope and despair. One widow said she felt guilty for smiling. Another admitted she kept dreaming of her husband, trapped under the waves, trying to call for help. "It's like drowning in the air," she said. "You can breathe, but you never stop sinking." When science meets the supernatural. As the years passed, even rational minds began to bend. Some families reported vivid dreams, planes hovering above oceans, voices calling from static. Captain Chong began visiting temples, consulting spiritual mediums who claimed to see the aircraft under the sea. He didn't believe them, but he kept going. "Because science failed," he said, "then maybe faith won't." The investigators' final pilgrimage. In 2018, after the final search ended, Chong traveled to the beaches of Madagascar. He carried a small jar, sand and seawater from Malaysia, and poured it into the Indian Ocean. "You stood there for hours, eyes on the horizon. If they're out there," he said, "at least they know someone's still looking." A local fisherman told him that some nights he saw lights over the sea, white, silent, drifting. Chong smiled sadly. "Maybe it's them," he said. The ghost in the data. Back in Kuala Lumpur, the official investigation center was closing down. Computers were being wiped, hard drives archived. Before leaving, one young data analyst, Lena Raman, decided to review the satellite logs one last time. On the final handshake, she noticed something odd: a tiny distortion in the signal, milliseconds before the aircraft vanished. It wasn't an error. It wasn't noise. It was something else. A transmission, almost like a brief reactivation. She didn't tell anyone. She just saved the data under a single word: echo. The silence that remains. The Indian Ocean is vast enough to hide its secrets forever. But for those left behind, the silence has become its own kind of sound. The hum of unanswered questions. The ghost frequency of loss. "They say the ocean keeps what it takes," Chong once said. Maybe that's true, but sometimes I think it's still listening. Somewhere out there, under miles of cold blue water, lies the truth. Not lost, just waiting for the right ears to hear it. When truth sinks beneath the ocean, stories rise to the surface. The world starts guessing. Within weeks of MH370's disappearance, the official narrative began to splinter. Every country involved, Malaysia, Australia, China, the US, had its own theory, its own agenda. But the one thing everyone agreed on? It shouldn't have been possible. A Boeing 777, flying under radar surveillance, equipped with transponders, GPS, satellite links, doesn't just vanish. So, the world did what it always does when logic fails. It started to imagine. Theory number 1, the pilot's secret. The first and most haunting theory revolved around Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, the man who had spent more than 18,000 hours in the air. To some, he was a devoted father, a kind neighbor, a quiet man who loved flying. To others, he became the perfect suspect, calm, skilled, capable of disappearing a plane. Investigators searching his home found something chilling. A flight simulator with a route eerily similar to the one MH370 had taken, over the Andaman Sea, ending in the Indian Ocean. Was it an innocent coincidence or a rehearsal? A forensic team from the FBI examined deleted files. They discovered flight paths saved weeks before the disappearance. Paths that led to the Southern Ocean with no landing site. It was enough to ignite a global firestorm. He practiced the perfect suicide, one Australian journalist claimed on live TV. Or, another argued, someone used his simulator to frame him. Captain Zahari's family denied everything. He loved that plane, his daughter Aisha said. He wouldn't hurt anyone. The world wanted a villain, but the truth was murkier than a cockpit shadow. Theory number 2, the fire in the sky. Another theory suggested that MH370 suffered a catastrophic electrical fire, maybe from the lithium-ion batteries in its cargo hold. The idea was simple and terrifying. A fire starts. The cabin fills with smoke. Pilots lose consciousness, and the plane continues on autopilot until fuel runs out. Radar data even supported this. A slow, steady descent before disappearing entirely. It explained the silence, the lack of mayday calls, but not the deliberate turns, the changes in altitude, the 7 handshakes with satellites after contact was lost. Those required human input. So maybe the fire theory was only half right. Theory number 3, the military cover-up. If the ocean didn't hide MH370, perhaps someone else did. A growing camp of online sleuths argued that the plane had crossed into sensitive military airspace, either Indian or US-controlled, and had been mistaken for a threat. They shot it down, one anonymous radar technician claimed, and then buried the truth. This idea gained traction when locals in the Maldives reported seeing a low-flying jet with red stripes. On the morning of March 8th, hours after MH370 was supposed to have vanished, officially, those reports were dismissed. Unofficially, they never went away. And when wreckage pieces began washing ashore across the Indian Ocean, flaperons, cabin panels, fragments of seats, critics asked why none of the serial numbers matched directly to the plane's official maintenance records. Coincidence? or a cover-up stitched together from scraps. Theory number 4. The cargo nobody talked about. Buried in the shipping manifest was an odd entry: lithium batteries and 200 kilograms of unidentified electronics. Investigators later discovered these belonged to a military contractor transporting equipment to Beijing. But no one could say exactly what that equipment was. Some suggested it was surveillance gear. Others whispered about classified weapon components. If true, it opened a dark possibility that the plane had been hijacked not for ransom, but for what it carried. There were whispers that the U.S. military base on Diego Garcia had intercepted the plane to prevent sensitive cargo from reaching China. No proof, no official statement, just static and a hole in the sky. Theory number 5, the ghost flight. Among pilots, there's a term: ghost flight, when a plane loses cabin pressure and continues flying with everyone aboard unconscious. Could MH370 have suffered a slow decompression at high altitude? In that scenario, passengers would have blacked out within minutes. The pilots might have tried to turn back, explaining the sudden western deviation, but eventually succumbed as well. The plane, now empty of life, would have continued for 6 more hours, silently crossing oceans until fuel starvation brought it down. Cold, automatic, tragically plausible. But again, those deliberate altitude shifts, those 7 satellite pings, that soft whisper of control, someone was still flying. Theory number 6, hijacking from the inside. Another possibility: remote hijacking. In 2014, cybersecurity experts had already warned about vulnerabilities in modern airliners. How certain onboard systems could be accessed wirelessly through the entertainment network. If someone had exploited that, a technician, a passenger with specialized equipment, they could, theoretically, seize control of the plane's navigation systems. The idea sounded like science fiction, until Boeing quietly issued a software patch 2 years later, addressing exactly that kind of risk. Coincidence again? Maybe. The parallel flight theory. In 2018, a French aerospace engineer, Ghislain Watralos, proposed a radical alternative. There were 2 aircrafts involved. He argued that MH370 had been shadowed by another Boeing 777, possibly a military plane, using radar masking to stay hidden. That would explain how it vanished so cleanly from civil radar systems. But no government ever admitted to flying in that region that night. Still, radar data did show one unidentified blip traveling parallel to MH370, the psychological turn. Behind all these theories was a single haunting question. Why do humans invent when they can't explain? Because not knowing is unbearable. For every fragment of wreckage found, 10 new stories emerged. Every unanswered ping became a conspiracy. Even investigators weren't immune. Some admitted they'd begun dreaming of the plane, seeing it, hearing phantom signals, feeling it circle above them in the dark. It's like the mystery infected us, one Australian soap operator said. We stopped chasing data and started chasing ghosts. The ocean itself becomes a character. The southern Indian Ocean, vast, merciless, silent, turned from setting into antagonist. At depths exceeding 15,000 feet, sonar scans painted an alien landscape. Mountains taller than Everest, trenches deeper than nightmares. If MH370 was down there, it was somewhere the human eye was never meant to reach. Even advanced search vessels like Fugro Discovery and Ocean Infinity could only map narrow corridors. The rest was black infinity. "You could hide 10 cities down there," said one technician. "Or one airplane forever." The myth takes shape. By 2019, MH370 had evolved beyond tragedy. It became mythology, the Bermuda Triangle of the digital age. Podcasts, documentaries, TikTok theories, millions of voices trying to fill the void left by silence. One could even say MH370 had become a mirror. Whatever people feared most, they saw reflected in it. Governments saw cover-ups, pilots saw failure, families saw endless hope. And in the reflection, the real story began to blur. The lost transmission. In 2020, a private research group in France claimed to have intercepted an unidentified radio signal from the Indian Ocean, recorded days after the disappearance. The audio was faint, distorted by static, but one word was allegedly audible: alive. Was it real? Most experts dismissed it as interference. But for some families, that one word reignited everything. "Until I see the wreckage," said a Chinese mother, "my daughter is still alive." The theories collapse. By 2022, after nearly a decade of speculation, fatigue began to set in. Even the wildest theorists had run out of fuel. Satellite experts had combed every byte of data, every waveform, every sonar anomaly. Theories started collapsing under their own weight. There were too many variables, too much ocean, too many ghosts. "It's the world's first global mystery," said one journalist. "Everyone has a piece of the puzzle, and none of them fit." And yet, the echo persists. Still, there are moments, flashes, reports, sonar blips that suggest the mystery is not done. In 2023, Ocean Infinity announced plans to resume the search, this time with advanced underwater drones capable of scanning the seafloor in total darkness. The lead engineer said something that stuck with everyone watching. "We're not chasing a plane anymore. We're chasing a shadow." Epilogue. The theories we tell ourselves. In the end, none of the theories, not the pilot, not the fire, not the hijacking, could explain everything. Maybe MH370 wasn't meant to be solved. Maybe in a world obsessed with control, this was the one event that reminded us how fragile we really are. The plane became more than metal. It became a symbol of grief, of obsession, of the unknown that still haunts the modern sky. "Every mystery," said investigator Peter Chong, "is a mirror. What we see in it is ourselves. And somewhere, in the vast quiet of the Indian Ocean, a single unanswered ping still echoes, a whisper from the deep, reminding us that even in an age of satellites and science, the world still keeps its secrets."